Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jack Daly, the John and Adrian Mars Director of the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. And it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the 13th Annual John Glenn Lecture in Space History. We inaugurated the Glenn Lecture in 2004. It quickly became one of our most popular annual events, and tonight is no exception. Our program this evening will feature a historic conversation between a legendary space pioneer and a visionary rocket entrepreneur. In addition to those of you lucky enough to secure tickets, many more will be watching on a live webcast, which also will be in our archive. So if you want to review it sometime in the future. Senator Glenn can't be with us tonight, but he sends his best regards. His accomplishments as a pilot, astronaut, statesman are all a great inspiration for all of us. Thank you to our speakers for being here tonight. Mr. David Rubenstein, co-founder and co-CEO of the Carlyle Group, region of the Smithsonian, will be tonight's moderator. Mr. Jeff Bezos, founder and CEO of Amazon.com and Blue Origin, is here to discuss what it will take to unlock spaceflight for everyone, everywhere. And coming home tonight is Major General Michael Collins, who once held what some have called the best job in the world, director of the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum. Welcome back, Mike. As the founding director, General Collins was responsible for the design and construction of this building, which opened as a bicentennial gift for American people on July 1st, 1976. More than 327 million visitors have walked through this museum since it opened, which is why we're renovating it. Our doors in confirming that the museum he built, like the ship he flew to the moon, is a priceless national treasure. In just 2 weeks, on July 1st, we will celebrate 4 decades of unparalleled success and rededicate our main gallery, the Boeing Milestones of Flight Hall. That gallery, where so many millions have discovered the story of flight, is one of the world's great public spaces. And we have Boeing to thank for helping us reinvent it for the decades ahead. Over many years, Boeing has partnered with the Smithsonian on countless important projects, from supporting the Boeing Milestones of Flight Hall and the Boeing Aviation Hangar at the Stephen F. Udvar-Hazy Center in Chantilly, Virginia, to sponsoring the John Glenn Lecture Series. We would not be the museum we are today without their support. On behalf of the museum and our past, present, and future visitors, I want to thank Boeing for their steadfast support. We look forward to celebrating the company's centennial anniversary, along with our 40th anniversary, along with our country's 240th anniversary, all on the 1st of July, where we'll have an all-nighter, and you're all invited. When I disapproved that the first time, they came back and said, "You're not the target audience." So I'll get it started, and I hope you have a great time. Let's see, I guess I better get on to the next. It's now a great pleasure to introduce the Chairman, President, and Chief Executive Officer of the Boeing Company, Mr. Dennis Muilenburg. Dennis?
All right, well, good evening, and it's really a pleasure to be here with all of you. And Jack, thank you for that kind introduction and the kind words about the Boeing Company. We are honored to support and partner with you and the National Air and Space Museum. It's a really important mission. And thank you as well for your leadership and your service to our country. And let's give Jack a well-deserved hand. And as General Daly said, this is an exciting year for us, the 40th anniversary of the National Air and Space Museum. Boeing will be celebrating its centennial. We'll be 100 years old on July 15. We'll have that early celebration on July 1, as you said. And it's one that's involved all aspects of aerospace. And we think about during that first century of aviation, people went from walking on the earth to walking on the moon. And we went from riding horses to flying in airplanes and spaceships. It's been an incredible journey, and Boeing's been honored to be a part of that. And tonight it's my privilege to introduce the speakers and moderator that will be leading tonight's discussion around space. And I can tell you personally, as a space enthusiast, how excited I am that this is the topic for tonight. First of all, again, I want to recognize Michael Collins. It's a privilege to have a national hero here with us tonight. And I mentioned earlier that when I told my 15-year-old son that I was going to meet him this evening, he said, "No way." Right? And so he's done a lot to inspire the country, and I think we can all remember back to the Apollo 11 mission, whether we saw it real time or have seen it since. Boeing was proud to be part of the Apollo missions, but the inspiration that created and the long-term impact to our country and to the world is well recognized. So it's great to have Michael here with us tonight, the command module pilot for the Apollo 11 mission. Also, tonight it's a great privilege for us to be here with Jeff Bezos, one of the great entrepreneurs of our time, a great business leader, and another space enthusiast. And among other things, at the Boeing Company, we have the privilege of working with Jeff and his Blue Origin team on a future rocket engine and space opportunities. But more broadly than that, Jeff and his team are breaking barriers in low-cost, reliable space access and just fundamentally changing the equation about how we'll get to space in the future. And that is exciting to see, and we're honored to partner with you in aspects of that, and thanks for your leadership as well. And then lastly, I'd like to recognize David Rubenstein as well. David's been a great friend and a business leader, community leader, philanthropist, well known here in the Washington, D.C. community, and more broadly, also a great historian, a great fan of the space business, and also a great supporter of the National Air and Space Museum. And David will be our moderator this evening. So if I could, I'd like to welcome all three of you fine gentlemen up to the stage here, and we look forward to the discussion. And I think my last duty here, you're going to get it? No. My last duty here was to try to make this podium descend. Now, I'm an engineer by training, so I suspect this was the real reason for my invitation tonight. It works. And look at that. That's Boeing technology there. All right, thank you very much. All right, gentlemen, it's good to see you.
Okay, so how many people here would like to go into space? Okay, how many people would like to go to the moon? Okay. All right, you're going to hear a lot about that tonight. But first, when we start, can you hear me? Okay. So let me ask you each an individual question first. Michael Collins, you were the first director of this museum. Getting it off the ground, getting the money for it and so forth. Was doing that harder than getting to the moon?
I think it probably would have been, and except it was for Barry Goldwater, who wanted badly to get this museum underway. And what he told me was, if you're ever here with a kin, please mention them. So I'd be delighted to mention that I'm here with my daughter Kate from Chicago, who to some of you soap opera fans is better known as Natalie, and Anne from Boston now. Anne, I don't know about a space buff. I asked her, suppose she had been in Neil Armstrong's shoes, would she have said, one small step for a woman? She shot back. Said, no, does this suit make me look fat? So maybe that's why she was not picked. I don't know.
Okay. All right, and Jeff, you've built one of the greatest technology companies in the world. In just 20-some years, you've taken a company from nothing to Amazon, which everybody in the world now knows and most people in the world seem to use. Was that harder to do than trying to get a space company off the ground, which is more of a challenge to you?
Totally different challenges. So one of the things that I find, if I think back on the last 20 years, you have to remember 20 years ago, I was driving the packages to the post office myself in my 1987 Chevy Blazer, dreaming that one day I might be able to afford a forklift. And the internet, that's 1995. And 21 years later, the internet is this gigantic thing, and there are many, many successful companies. And the entrepreneurial dynamism that you see on the internet is incredible. And really, with Blue Origin, this new challenge that I'm taking on with Blue Origin, what I want to do is put the heavy lifting infrastructure in place so that the next generation can have a dynamic entrepreneurial explosion of ideas and inventions in space, just like we've had with the internet. And the reason you can't do that today is because there's just too much heavy lifting involved, literally. Getting to space is so expensive and so hard. When we started Amazon, I didn't have to build a logistics infrastructure system to deliver parcels. There was something already, UPS already existed, and the US Postal Service already existed. I didn't need to build a remote payment system. There were already credit cards. And similarly, there were computers around, and that didn't have to get, all those things would have been tens of billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars of infrastructure. The long-distance phone network became the backbone of the internet, but it already existed. And so you could have this dynamic entrepreneurial explosion because all the heavy CapEx infrastructure was in place. For space, it's not like that. The price of admission is so high. So that's the big difference. And what I'm super excited about is lowering that cost. I want to dramatically lower that cost so that 20 years from now, a new generation of people with startup money, real entrepreneurs, small entrepreneurs, can do amazing things in space. Think how cool that would be.
Jeff, let me do a follow-up with you. Why is it that the people who are trying to build great space companies now all have day jobs doing something else? Richard Branson has a day job. Elon Musk has a day job. You have a day job. Why don't people have full-time jobs just getting people into space? Why is it only people like you who have day jobs are doing all these things?
Well, for one thing, it's expensive. You need a lucrative day job so you can afford your night job. It's Blue Origin is, I think, going to be a profitable business one day. I certainly want it to be. I think that's healthy, and it would be. You want businesses to be self-sustaining so they can do amazing things. But it needs a lot of funding, and it needs a lot of funding for a long time in that investment phase. And so I'm very happy to do that. But I can only do it because I was lucky with Amazon.
Michael, let me ask you a question. This is something that's hard to believe. You landed on the moon in July, or you and your team landed on the moon in July of 1969, and we're going to get into that in a moment. But why do you think so many people in the world, or at least some people in the world, still think that it was fake and that it was actually in a studio? And was there a studio you actually filmed this in, or where did it happen?
Well, I'd love to get them all together in one room, and pick their brains. I think it'd be fun. Well, the Wright brothers flew in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, and I think it was December 17th. And the evening before the 16th, every year they have the meeting of the Man Will Never Fly Society. And one year I was their guest speaker. It was one of the finest speeches I've ever made. And I was forced to reveal that it did take place if you drive south out of Kitty Hawk. There's this gigantic sand dune just past the village of Rodanthe. And we'd filmed just on the other side of that. And my proof is, if you look at the unretouched NASA photographs, you see a crushed pack of Marlboros over here and a Dr. Pepper can over there. Well, that's proof, man. So
Okay.
What was your question again?
Why? That's a pretty good answer. So for both of you, in the heyday of the Mercury, Gemini, and Apollo program, everybody's attention was captured by it, captivated by it. Congress was putting up money. Everybody seemed to want to have the astronauts go to where they were going. Everybody wanted to be an astronaut. Why do you think the U.S. government has basically receded a bit in its mission to go back to the moon or to go to Mars? And why is it that entrepreneurs are now leading the effort? There's nothing wrong with that, but where's the U.S. government? Is it a case of done that, been there, and don't want to do it anymore? Or, yes, but for both of you.
Well, I think most things, especially in the world of economics and economy, are cyclical, and we came to kind of a crest of the wave in the latter days of the Apollo program, and that momentum was hard to keep going. I think we're in a time of hiatus now, and I think the momentum has possibilities of picking up again. I hope so. To me, the focus should be on Mars. My friend Neil Armstrong, who is a far better engineer than I, thought it was worthwhile to stop off and get a little more organized on the moon before heading on to Mars. I disagree with that. I think we ought to just go. I used to joke that I thought NASA should be renamed in NAMA, the National Aeronautics and Mars Association. And I still, to some extent, would like to see that. But anyway, on to
Okay,
Mars.
All right, so why do you think it is that the U.S. government basically has receded a bit and entrepreneurs have the opportunity to do it? Do you think there's some way to recapture the U.S. government's interest in this?
Well, I think if you think back to the kind of the heyday of the 1960s and the Apollo program and all of that excitement, my gut instinct on this is that we as a civilization, we as humanity, pulled that moon landing way forward, out of sequence from where it actually should have been. It was a gigantic effort with what is, in many ways, it should have been impossible. And they pulled it off with barely any computational power. They were still using slide rules. They couldn't numerically model in computers a lot of these important processes like combustion inside a rocket engine, which is still hard today, but we can do it a little bit. They didn't have computational fluid dynamics to really, everything had to be done in a wind tunnel. Nothing could be done on a computer. So I think the reason we've sort of taken a hiatus, maybe in part at least, is because we pulled that forward to a time when it should have been impossible. And then once it was done, we kind of had to wait and let technology catch up. The reason that Blue Origin and SpaceX and Virgin Galactic and all these companies today, any of these private companies, the only reason that we can do this kind of endeavor at all is because we're standing on the shoulders of NASA, who invented all of this technology. We're still using all the things that they invented back in the 60s. We have refined versions of it. But even the computer codes that we use to validate our designs have been honed and fine-tuned by NASA over decades. So this is, I think we're finally entering, I believe that we are entering a new golden age of space and space exploration, and that the time has come for that to happen because we as a species have up-leveled ourselves in terms of technology. We're ready to do it now. It's amazing that we did it in 1969.
So
It's crazy.
let's suppose the next president of the United States, we're having a presidential election, everybody knows that, and whoever is elected, suppose that person calls you up and says, I want to jumpstart the space program. Give me some advice. What should I do? Should I go back to the moon? Should I go to Mars? Should I get into no planets? Should I build a space shuttle again? What should I do? And Michael, what would you say the next president of the United States about how to jumpstart this program?
I'd probably be so nervous I'd drop the telephone. I've never had the President of the United States ask me a question like that. As I said earlier, I happen to believe in Mars. I think one of the wonderful things about the Apollo program was what John F. Kennedy said. He was president. He said, we want a man on the moon by the end of the decade. Simple. I mean, did you have questions about that? Maybe something about that you didn't understand? I mean, we all understood what it was, what we were supposed to do, and we need something similar to that today. I don't know what that is. As I say, I have every hope, and I think Mars is the focus that we should have. But whatever it is we want to do, you need a lot of support from the President of the United States. You have to have the feeling that he's a man or a woman who thinks about space, likes the exploration of space, thinks it's a worthwhile investment for our government, and puts it pretty high on the priority list. Now, regardless of parties and who you like or don't like, we really haven't had that personal involvement of a president, I don't think, since John F. Kennedy, but it was a wonderful help for us to just say what the president said. There it is. It's stark, it's outlined. You could write it on your thumbnail, and off you go.
Jeff, what would you do if the president called you and said, I want to get the government to help entrepreneurs like you, and I want to jumpstart public interest in space? What would you recommend to him?
I think big prizes would be an interesting thing to do. So, just like DARPA has done their DARPA Grand Challenges, which really kicked off self-driving cars, you could, for example, NASA for many years has planned and done quite detailed planning on a Mars sample return mission. So an automated robotic vehicle that goes to Mars, lands on Mars, collects some Mars samples, and then lifts back off and comes back to Earth and brings some Martian samples back. It's a very expensive mission to do. It's a very complex mission to do. One thing that the government could do is just offer a very large prize to whoever first brings back some Mars samples. It would be very interesting. It would be, that kind of horse race would create lots of attention. People would compete for it. Who knows how it would end. But it also, if nobody brings the samples back, it costs taxpayers nothing. So it's a very effective way of getting a lot of interest and a lot of teams competing and trying to come up with creative ways to do that. I also would advise that NASA needs to go after gigantic, hard technology goals. An example would be an in-space qualified nuclear reactor for deep space missions. Another very difficult, very challenging, not something that private enterprise is going to undertake anytime soon. Another gigantically hard mission that NASA could undertake, which would be very exciting, would be hypersonic point-to-point travel, so on Earth. But because NASA isn't just about space. So I think prizes and then really hard technology programs.
All right. Now, do either of you believe in UFOs? What do you think happened in Roswell, New Mexico? Do you think we've ever had any UFOs in our Earth?
Well, one of the horrible things is that word UFO, because anyone who's flown in the night sky or the day sky, occasionally you see something, the Lubbock Lights, it's a flock of geese where things just happen to be pointed properly at it. And so, have I ever seen a UFO? Yes, I have seen an unidentified object in the sky. Do I think it was inhabited by little green men from far away? No, it's some aberrant lighting condition that caused it. But I'm not answering your question. Ask me again. What was the question?
Well, on the backside of the moon, when you went on the backside of the moon, you didn't see little men or women walking around there, did you?
No. The backside of the moon was kind of nice. I couldn't hear mission control saying, Apollo 11, do this, do that, check that, flex the other. Woo! It was pleasant.
Yeah. You believe there's UFOs? Do you believe there's life elsewhere in the galaxy?
Oh yes, I think there's life elsewhere in the galaxy, but I do not think they have visited us, and they're not abducting people, and it's not a giant government conspiracy to hide you. No, I think when the UFOs come, if they ever do, they'll make themselves quite visible. Okay.
So Michael, let me ask you, how did you first get involved in the space program? You were a graduate of West Point, and you ultimately were a fighter pilot, but how did you get selected? Initially, you weren't selected initially, but how did you get selected?
We just explained it.
How did you get selected? Ultimately, you got selected.
Well, I wasn't 8 years old and looked up into the night sky and said the moon's for me. I used to make model airplanes. Oh, by the way, Neil Armstrong made model airplanes. He and I, tell me the difference.
That's how you get selected, make model airplanes?
Mine would confuse me a little bit. I wasn't sure. We both wanted performance, higher and faster. And my solution was to wind the rubber band a little bit more, a couple of extra turns. Neil built a wind tunnel. Can you know that? Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
Well, anyway,
so I
got into it step by step. I went to West Point Military Academy. My father, my brother, my uncle had all gone there, but fundamentally I went there because it was a free education. Then I had a choice, Army or Air Force. My uncle was Army Chief of Staff. I thought, ooh, nepotism. I snuck off to the Air Force. Then the choice is fly or don't fly. Then fly. Big ones or little ones? Oh, little ones are better than the big ones. Sorry, Boeing, where it is. Then fly the same ones over and over, or fly the new ones. I wanted to fly the new ones. Next thing you knew, I was a test pilot, and NASA was looking for test pilots. It was that simple, just a stair step.
So when you finally got selected, and you get to meet the other astronauts, do you say, how did I get here, or how did they get here?
No. We were, no, back up a bit. Before there really was a space program, people, the bureaucrats or whoever, the scientists, the medics, all got together and tried to figure out who do they want to hire, what kind of people. And they're, you know, some of the proposals were bizarre. I mean, we couldn't breathe, so we picked mountain climbers. They're used to that stuff. Or you're going to become so enraptured by space, you're not going to want to return. It's similar to some scuba divers. So you get a scuba diver. Some said, no, it's dangerous, so we ought to get bullfighters, huh? And so all these crazy ideas were compiled and filtered and put together in a paper to President Eisenhower. And he said, okay, you got to be a graduate of an accredited test pilot school. So immediately this pool of billions. And today, NASA's looking for, I think, 12 people, and a year or so from now, so far they have over 18,000 applicants today. But if you say you got to be a graduate of an accredited test pilot school, that pool just shrinks. And so I was very fortunate to be one of few people considered. I'd never make it today, I guarantee you that.
Jeff, how did you get interested in space?
How did I get interested in space? Well, actually, I became inspired when I was 5 years old, when I watched Apollo 11. You know, this guy and his two pals go to the moon, and it was, I could just tell how excited everybody was around me. And you don't choose your passions choose you. And ever since I'm 5 years old, I've been thinking about rockets and rocket engines and spacecraft pretty much every day of my life.
All right, but everybody as a little boy, or maybe a little girl as well, they're interested in the space area, but they don't actually go ahead and do the kind of things you did. So what prompted you, after you started Amazon, to start a whole separate company, and how much of your time do you devote to it?
Well, I had been hoping to build a space company since I was a little kid, and then, you know, kind of reality came into play, and I realized it was going to be really expensive to start a space company. And then I kind of moved on. I fell in love with computers, and then I won this kind of lottery called Amazon.com. And then I realized, hey, wait, I can do that original childhood dream now. And so I started this company, and it employs, now we're up to about 700 people. And we're building a suborbital tourism vehicle which competes with Virgin Galactic, and our goal there is to make it possible ultimately for anybody who wants to go to space to be able to afford it. We're just going to keep working at that goal patiently until we achieve it. And then we're also building an orbital vehicle, and we'll fly that at the end of this decade for the first time. And so it is, you know, and my belief is that to dramatically lower the cost of space, it's all about reusability. You just have to make your vehicles reusable. You can't throw them in the bottom of the ocean every time after you use them if you ever want to dramatically reduce the cost.
So would you go on one of these space trips yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. I fully expect to go into space myself someday. And
Have you told your family that, or your Amazon
I'm telling them, they're
shareholders?
sitting here in the front row, so
Okay.
I'm telling them right
What
now.
about
No,
the
they
Amazon-
know.
the Amazon
They
shareholders?
know I can't be kept away. No, I will do it very safely. You know, I think that you know, space travel can be both much lower cost and much more reliable and safe. And in fact, I think reusability will add to reliability. So you don't want, you know, I would much rather fly a new Boeing 787 after it's been flying a little while, not like the very first flight out of the factory, you know. And so when you build these space vehicles, you can't send them on test runs the way we do them if they're expendable. Their very first mission is also their very last mission. And that just really hobbles you in terms of making things safe and reliable.
So, Michael, let me ask you, all right, when you're selected to go on Apollo 11, was there any jockeying saying, hey, I'd like to be the first man on the moon, I'd like to be the second man on the moon, I'd like to run the command module? How did they decide who would do what?
You know, there was some small fuss, if I remember correctly, before the flight, and maybe a larger one after, about who went first. But it seemed to me that Neil Armstrong should have gone first. He was the commander, and that just seemed more appropriate to me in a more normal sequence of events. And I'm glad he did. I think, you know, Neil was just an amazing fellow. He at that time, there were 30 of us in the astronaut office in Houston, and of the 30, there was kind of like 1 here and 29 there in terms of test piloting experience. And that was what we considered the single most important yardstick, if you will. So Neil was, in a way, because of his experience out at Edwards as a test pilot for NASA, NACA, and then NASA, he was almost in just a class by himself. And also, I thought, personality-wise, people will argue with that. They say, well, he was too reticent. He didn't get out in front and sell the program. But I think from a personality point, he was a superb choice. I wouldn't want I can get it for you, a wholesale PR man out there trying to sell. I think that had been dreadful. And so I think if you considered the positions on the crew hierarchy and the worth of the man, the personality, the sort of person he was, I think it was a wonderful choice.
So if on that flight, you could say there are 4 complicated parts. Getting off the Earth, you don't know if it's going to work. Yes. Then getting into the moon's orbit, you don't know if that's really going to work. Then having the the lunar module go down, then having the lunar module come back up and hook with you, and then of course go back to the Earth. You could say 5 parts. Which do you think was the most dangerous, or that made you the most nervous, that would actually not happen? Well,
going to the moon is I always liken it to a daisy chain. It's a long, complex daisy chain, a lot of links, fragile. You break one link, the rest of them don't matter a lot. If you think of it that way, the weakest and the worriest to me was getting the LEM off the lunar surface. I thought we'd launch okay, we'd get to the moon, we could navigate. Someone asked Neil, wasn't the navigation terribly complicated? And Neil had a very nice little dry sense of humor. He said, no, we could see the thing the whole way to the moon. But so those things I was not worried about. But I was worried about the ascent and the rendezvous. They had only, we were big on redundancy. We wanted 2 of everything, but the design of the lunar module was such we just had 1 ascent engine, 1 engine bell hanging out of the bottom. That thing had to work or they were stuck there forever. And then things got really complicated from my point of view. If they got off on time, burned the engine for the right number of seconds in precisely the right azimuth, then it was pretty simple. But any variations in their trajectories gave me fits. Sometimes then my strategy would be to drop down into a lower orbit and try to catch them faster. And if they got past a certain point, then my strategy was to go higher and slower and let them make an extra turn around the moon and catch me. I had a book around my neck, a big fat 8x10 notebook kind of thing. And if I remember right, I think it had 18 variations on this theme. So given the fact that they were lots could have gone wrong on the lunar surface. That single engine might have had a hiccup. I might have been able to rescue. Obviously, I could not go down and land. But short of that, I obviously had a lot of ways of rescuing them. But I'm not sure I knew all 18 of them as well as I should have.
You've written and you've said that the most maybe dangerous job you had was the one of perhaps having to come back by yourself. In other words, you were afraid that perhaps they didn't come back and they were stuck on the moon and you would have to go back by yourself, and you lived in fear that people would blame you for some reason that you hadn't brought them back. Can you talk about that?
We never discussed that, but I mean, it was, I think, clear to them and clear to me. I was, if they were stuck, I was not going to commit suicide. I was coming home, but, I'd have been a marked person for the rest of my life. It had been just god-awful, so anyway.
I should have mentioned, coming back to the Earth is not exactly a day in the park, a walk in the park, because can you describe how difficult it is to get back in the Earth at the right rotation, orbit?
It wasn't as bad as it sounds. If you run the numbers, the arithmetic says, oh my God, if you go a little too steep, you burn up. If you go a little too shallow, you bounce out, and we'll see you 6 months after you've run out of oxygen. So those numbers are frightening. However, we had, despite what Jeff says about our extraordinarily primitive technology, and it was pretty primitive. We had a whole basement full of IBM 5060s or whatever they were, and we had antennas in Spain, Canberra. So if we got about a one hiccup off our trajectory on the way back, we were told, notified, made a correction. So all the way back from the moon, fortunately, we didn't have to make many corrections, but we had the capacity to, instead of flying a nice smooth arc that might have been too high or too low, we were right exactly on that path.
When you came back, there was a fear that you had moon germs with you and that you had to be quarantined for weeks. What was that all about? I mean,
I used to pray every night that the mice didn't die because we were, we were locked up with, I don't know, dozens and dozens of mice, and suppose they'd gotten Ebola or something, we'd still to this day be in quarantine down there. So
when you came back here, you've gone all the way up to the moon. You're circling the moon. You've come all the way back, and then you land in the water, and then you take Dramamine pills. I mean, after having done all that, why did you worry about Dramamine?
I don't think so. I didn't take any Dramamine. I don't think.
I thought when on the shuttle, when it landed on the space capsule landed in the water, I thought you were supposed to take Dramamine because it tilted so much.
Well, I lost a case of beers, but in the landing, it was that we switched seats. I switched seats with Buzz. He sat where I normally did, and he had. I was a navigator coming back, and he was the guy who was in charge of the parachutes, which might have been my domain, but it wasn't at that time in the flight. And the thing was, as soon as you hit, he was supposed to push in 2 circuit breakers, hit these 2 switches, and the parachutes would jettison. And if he didn't do that swiftly, we'd be caught by the wind and flipped over. And then we'd be upside down for, a couple of hours while you had to pump up pumps and Anyway, I had a case of beer bet on whether we were or were not going to go over, and he messed it up, and we went over, and I had to owe him a case of beer, and we got sick, not physically sick, but we had to upside down for a while, and it was a mess, but.
Good work. So Jeff, suppose somebody in the audience here, somebody watching, wants to go to space. Where do they sign up? How much does it cost, and when will they be able to do it?
Well, for the suborbital mission, we don't know yet exactly what we're going to charge. It's going to be in the same. Virgin Galactic is charging, I don't know, somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000 per ticket. We're going to be in the same range to start with, and then keep working over time to make it cheaper.
And when do you think that'll be available?
2018. So we'll fly our first test astronauts in late 2017, hopefully. If the test program continues to go, we're flying again this Friday, and are webcasting that, so you can watch that. But if the test program continues to go well, we should be ready to put people on board in late 2017, and then paying astronauts in 2018.
And how can somebody sign up now, or you're not taking names now?
No, we're not taking deposits or anything yet.
In the case of people who do want to go, should they be physically fit, or can they be out of shape?
No, it doesn't. You don't need to be especially physically fit. There may be a few criteria, but it probably, I would think of it as that'll come later. We'll have more details on what you really need. But it's probably like if you can ride a roller coaster, you can probably do this. It's not something that requires special physical fitness.
And will you be able to order something on Amazon from up there?
Yeah, but you won't be able to get it delivered up there. Yeah, but we have, it'll be you'll be in. It's what Alan Shepard did in the early days. That's what suborbital space is. So instead of going around the Earth, that's orbital. You go up and you come back down. So you're in zero gravity for approximately 4 minutes. We have the largest windows that will have ever been in space. People who have been to space. We could ask Mike, but I've heard it from many, many people that it does change you. It changes the way you think about the Earth and humanity, and you get to see that thin limb of the Earth's atmosphere and the big blackness of space. And so I think people are going to be very excited about it.
Michael, you've written in your book that you wished all government leaders could go to outer space, because when you go to outer space, you can see the Earth as without boundaries and borders, and you kind of realize the fragility is the word you used, how fragile Earth is. Can you comment on that and why you saw the Earth as so fragile when you were up there?
You know, the idea of fragility never occurred to me before the flight, and it was kind of a surprise. Speaking of windows, I'd say in the command module there were 5 windows. So you want to look at the Earth, little things, see where you came from and all of that. Well, you look out a window number 1, nothing, black. Window number 2, 3, 4, 5. Look through all 5 windows. You can't. It's not there. So that's a very interesting starting point right there. If you stop and think about it, hey, you spent all your life in this little globe. You're up away from it. You want to know about it, see it, get back to it. It's gone. It isn't there. So, but anyway, obviously you know that sooner or later, if you twist the spacecraft and roll and pitch and yaw around in a certain way, it'll hove into view. And when it does, it's very small. About got a normal thumbnail. Hold it up. Let me see if it's. Yeah. Okay. Hold it out in front of you. Okay. That's what you see. That's what it looks like from the moon. It's like a normal thumbnail out in front of you, about that big. That's pretty small. And of course, we're mostly ocean, so you mostly see blue, depending on the weather conditions, but you see quite a few clouds. You don't see land so much. So it's very shiny, the albedo, you know, the amount of sunlight that the moon, the Earth reflects far exceeds that of the moon. But somehow this little tiny blue and white sphere looks lovely and clean, which it's not. It looks fragile, which it is. I don't know why it looks fragile. That was just my reaction. God, it's a beautiful little thing. I'll be back in a couple of days, I hope. But in the meantime, it just looks so beautiful and fragile.
Okay. So let me ask you this. You and 2 other men went to the moon and came back safely. That's an incredible bonding experience, but it didn't seem as if going up you were though close to each other. You weren't particularly close friends, and afterwards you didn't become even closer friends. What was the nature of the relationship between the 3 of you?
I loved them both. Our crew was a little, I think one of the books I wrote, I described the crew as amiable strangers, which in a way we were. I didn't mean that in a bad way, but unlike most crews were formed, first they were a backup crew, nowadays for a couple of years, and then they worked together as a team and became primary crew. Due to a whole set of circumstances, we didn't have that bonding experience. We all came together about 6 months before the flight. And then the other thing that was a little different is where these spacecraft are manufactured and where you test them. Neil and Buzz would be off in Bethpage, Long Island, worrying about Grumman putting the LEM together. I'd be in Downey, California, worrying about the command module. When we got together, no, we weren't together. They were 2 off in the LEM simulator. I'm in the command module simulator. So just what I would almost call freakish circumstances kept us from being as close as some of the crews.
You've now been back on Earth for quite a while, back in '69. You had a chance, though, if you'd stayed in the program, to go back and maybe be a person who went on the moon physically. Why did you choose not to do that and to retire from the space program?
Well, it was more a personal thing. My wife was from Boston. I don't think Houston was exactly her first choice of habitat. And I would be perfectly happy to be spending more time at home and less in Motel 6 off in East Overshoe somewhere. But I'd have to say, underlying that, I guess I had the wrong attitude in the sense that I thought Apollo 11 was kind of the apex of the program to do what John Kennedy said, to land a man on the moon by the end of the decade. And I'd help to do that and rather put up with what I thought would be another perhaps 3 years of simulators and motels and this, that, and the other. I just felt for me it was time to bail out.
Okay, and the most frequent question you've been asked since you've been back since 1969 is, what is it like to go to the bathroom in space? Do you really like the food that you get in space, or do you really drink Tang? Any of those questions. What was the most frequent question you've been asked?
Okay, the going to the bathroom is, so help me across my heart, never been asked. If I were asked, I'd say the answer is carefully. What was the second one, Tang?
What about the food? You ever asked about the food?
Well, I used to rate the food, and I don't think the food preparation people in Houston were too happy, but I'd give it spoons, you know. I think the cream of chicken soup gets 2 spoons is all out of 5, and so the food was decent. For 8 days, who cares? Now you want to stay up on a space station for a year, like these Scott guy is doing with his twin brother as a control down here, but then things like food and the amenities and crew compatibility. Crew compatibility is something that the psychiatrist always emphasized, and I can recall sitting next to John Young at a Gemini pre-flight press conference, and someone brought up, well, how did I feel about crew compatibility and on this, what was facing us? I said, come on, for 4 days I'd fly with a baboon. And John's sitting right there. He didn't get mad. He knew exactly where I was coming from. He laughed. But that's true, for a short period of time. Now, the thing is, you talk about Mars, then, woo, I'm dead wrong. Then you have all kinds of compatibility and physiological and other medical problems. I'm rambling on. I'm sorry.
That's not to really drink Tang. That used to be an advertisement. Drink the
Tang. Really, we had some kind of orange stuff. I don't know who or what it was.
So, Jeff, you're trying to get some people to go into space, but you also have a program to build rockets that can be relaunched for further exploration in space. Will the government of the United States ultimately use those for its exploration, or who would use those rockets for
Yeah, the idea is to build the infrastructure, and once you build the infrastructure to get to Earth orbit, it can be used for just about anything. You can use it for satellites, you can use it for human-rated missions, so that's the goal. The goal is to build, we want to build an orbital vehicle where the price of the propellant, the fuel, actually matters, where you start to actually think about the cost of fuel. No rocket has ever been built so far in the history of rockets where anybody has ever cared about the cost of the fuel, because the fuel cost is so dominated by throwing the hardware away. So it's about reusability, and then reusability will lower the cost enough to where we can practice. So space has been in stasis for 50 years. We launch about maybe 80 missions a year globally, all over the world. And that's not even a peak. It's come down a little bit from the peak maybe in the 80s. And so we've gotten better at it as a society, but not appreciably better. And that's because we don't practice enough. We humans get good at everything we practice a lot. So we need to be flying every day. And when we're flying every day, we'll get better.
Do you support the idea of sending men and women to Mars, or why not just send robots and pick up whatever's there? Do you think it should be humans?
I think you can justify sending men to Mars for science reasons. I think we have reached a state where robots can do that task probably better than people can. And the reason you send people to Mars is because it's so damn cool. It's a glorious human adventure. And we should do that now. But it does have to be done at a certain cost, and we have a lot of other priorities. For me, the big thing, I'm excited that I hope somebody goes to Mars because I want to watch it. I think it would be glorious. But for me, that's not the motivator for me. For me, the motivator is I want us to have millions of people living and working in space. We have a planet that is fragile. And I don't think we go into space as a kind of plan B. I hate that idea that we need a backup for Earth is not motivating for me. For me, plan B is make sure plan A works. We know a lot about this solar system, and I can assure you Earth is the best planet. We have looked at them all, and Earth is the best one, and we have to protect it. And we can use space to protect Earth. If you take baseline energy usage on Earth and grow it, compound it at just 3% a year, such is the power of compounding, that just in a few hundred years you'll have to cover the entire surface of the Earth in solar cells to power the planet. So we need to move ultimately over the next few hundred years. We need to build a real spacefaring civilization. I think what's going to happen is that we're going to move all heavy industry off Earth, and we'll zone Earth residential and light industrial. And we'll protect this glorious jewel of a planet because it is unique in our solar system, and we're unlikely to get to new solar systems anytime soon.
So for both of you, when you go to outer space, you look at the Earth, it's very fragile, there are no boundaries. Do you think it really makes a difference whether it's the United States is taking the lead on this or China is doing it, or why not do it together? Why not have,
For big exploration missions, I think you would do it together. If you were going to, do that glorious journey to Mars and put boots on Mars or settle Mars or any of the things like that, I think you would want to do that in a kind of consortium with many nations. And as a kind of a separate, if you're talking about space as a capability, it would be almost impossible to overstate the importance of space to United States national security. We're incredibly dependent. Our military is totally dependent on space assets. All of our guided munitions are GPS guided. Those satellites are actually very fragile. The National Reconnaissance Office satellites are super important, also quite fragile. So, and it's very asymmetric because we're more dependent on those high-tech assets than any other country is. They give us great capabilities, but they're also a vulnerability. So if you think of space, if you think about kind of Mars missions, I think they should be done cooperatively. But if you're thinking about national security missions, we need to preserve our preeminent position in space.
Okay. Michael, when you came back, Richard Nixon, President of the United States, greeted you on the USS Hornet, but you were quarantined, so he couldn't really talk to you. But he said at the time, this was the most important week since creation, which I think you said in your book maybe it was a little exaggeration, but maybe not. You were very famous, and the other two were very famous, but you chose not to cash in. You had beer commercial opportunities and all kinds of things. Why did you try to not really go ahead and make a lot of money out of your fame? And was there a philosophical thing you thought about not making a lot of money out of it?
I'm not against money. I'm not against making money, but I don't know. All my life, I have never. That's never been my objective. Every time I've changed jobs, what I've wanted to do is find something interesting. So I've looked for interesting jobs rather than money-producing jobs, and if I wanted to have both, oh my God, I'd have to make speeches. I'd have to go to the Washington National Air and Space Museum and be in the bottom of like a bowl, and I can't tell who's up there and what's going on, and so I don't know.
So now let me ask you, now you are 85 years old.
Yes.
And you're in great shape. You just did a sort of triathlon recently, and I guess you won your age category. Maybe you won it for younger people as well. So your motivation in life now, what is it that you would like to have as your legacy for your children and your grandchildren for what you've accomplished on Earth?
Geez, I don't know about legacy. I like doing the triathlon, although the training regimen is really tough. I have to swim one length in my pool, run around my backyard, and ride my bike into the garage. It's tough, I want to tell you. But no, I'm a good retiree. I live in Florida. I have a lot of hobbies. I watercolor paint. I follow Jeff on the stock market, and I read a lot. I have a lot of things going. I have two fantastic daughters. I don't know what my legacy is. I guess sitting right there and there. Anyway, I can't answer the question. I don't know. Ask it a different way.
All right, here a different way. Do you have any regrets about the career you've had? Is there anything you would do differently?
No, I've been very lucky. You know, Neil Armstrong born in 1930, Buzz Aldrin 1930, Mike Collins 1930. You don't call that lucky? Whoosh! We were there at the right time, and so on. I've been very lucky.
Jeff, your Blue Horizon, what's Blue Origin? Where did that name come from?
Blue Origin is Earth is the blue planet, and it's a great place to be from.
And is that a for-profit or a not-for-profit company?
It's for profit. I mean, well, it's not yet. I mean, that's an intention for the glorious future. It's in what we would call investment mode right now. But yeah, I think it can be a profitable company. I think it's going to take a long time. It wouldn't meet a, I did not make a big list of all of the business arenas I might enter and pick and force rank them and pick the one that I thought would have the highest return on invested capital. I'm doing this because I care about it, because I think it's important. But I do think it can be a self-sustaining, profitable business one day.
And do you think this could be a greater legacy than even Amazon, if you're successful in all the things that?
Well, if you're talking about professional endeavors, when asked that question, what do you want on your tombstone? I always like Warren Buffett's answer: world's oldest man. I have lots of things that are important to me and important to my heart, and so mine are sitting here in this row too. But if you're talking just about professional life, I think that if Blue Origin could enable that next generation to really have entrepreneurial dynamism in space, that would be something I would, when I'm 80 years old, I would look back on it, I would be so happy.
So for both of you, you're extraordinary Americans who had extraordinary careers. You've done great things for our country. I want to thank you on behalf of our country for everything you've done. And for those of you who want to learn more about Michael Collins' trip to the moon and his entire career, I highly recommend this book, Carrying the Fire, which is, I think, the best book ever written about space, and you should buy it on Amazon. So thank you very much for an extraordinary evening.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Well,
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank our speakers for a truly amazing evening. I'm a little concerned about Michael's criticism of this theater, though, since he designed and built it. Okay, he says IMAX messed it up. Okay. Well, again, thank you, Boeing, for making this possible, but mostly thanks to all of you for being here tonight and for coming out and supporting all of our programs. We really appreciate it. Without the sponsorship, they would not be possible. But without your support, they would also not be worth doing. So thank you very much. Please exit by the rear of the theater and have a great evening. Good night.